What's good, Newbark? I'm Andrew. I'm joined by my co-host Logan. Today we're going to be talking some about the massive PlayStation 5 reveal event we just got. What's going on, Logan?
Still taking in that design for the console, man. It's different.
Yeah, perhaps that's a good place to get started on the system because that was the big reveal we got at the end. We got a unique console design, and all speculation before this seemed to indicate Sony was going to have one version of the console at launch, and here they are showing up with two. Okay, let's start with how the console looks. I really like it. It's obnoxious and it's going to stand out. It's not going to look great in an entertainment center if you're one of those people who likes your systems to blend in, but that's what I love about it.
I just don't know how it's gonna sit horizontally. I don't see any feet on the side of it.
Yeah, and it's got that curvature going on both sides.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it can. There was like a very, very split second view of it sideways within the stream, but that could have just been the camera turning, not the console itself being sideways. So I'm not
Hmm.
sure. I feel like in the past with console reveals, if the console indeed can sit sideways, we've always seen it vertically and sideways. Here they just have them vertical.
Hmm.
And I know
That is
from
definitely interesting because this would be the first time since the PlayStation 2 that a PlayStation console would not have been able to sit in either direction.
I think all models of the PlayStation 2 could sit either direction.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah,
Including the PlayStation 2. Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's weird. That's so weird. And I know personally for me, the way my space is set up, and I would imagine for a lot of people who like to stick their consoles in an entertainment center, not having that horizontal option is kind of rough.
Yeah, definitely. It's always nice to at least have the option when you're redoing an entertainment system or if you're getting a new one or even moving. It's usually nice to be able to position the console in a way where you can get adequate cooling and storage space out of it. And this is a pretty bold move by Sony.
Yeah, and what's interesting is the Series X looks like a refrigerator, but Microsoft has also said you can sit that on its side. I mean, it's going to look weird, but you can sit it on its side. This, I'm
And
worried if I sit it on its side, it's going to be like jiggling the whole time, like a balance board.
or like one of those things where it like makes this slight vibration noise that bothers you.
Yeah. Oh god, like when you put an external hard drive on a piece of wood and it's
Oh,
reading,
yeah.
it's just zzz the whole time. Oof. Oof.
Yeah, that is definitely interesting how they did the disc slot too, because it does kind of look like how you mentioned. Like it kind of looks like an afterthought when you compare it to the digital edition, which is a lot more symmetrical. And then you look at I don't know, I guess the regular edition. I don't know how they're going to market this, or the
Yeah.
disc edition. I don't know. It just
Yeah.
says PlayStation 5 and then PlayStation 5 Digital Edition.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I know for people like you and I especially this is concerning
Hmm.
because last year we saw the launch of the Xbox One S All Digital Edition, which failed horrendously. But
Hmm.
beyond the fact that it was all digital, that had a lot of other factors working against it too. First off, when it launched at its price point, if you were willing to either wait a couple weeks or most of the time just do some shopping around, you could find a regular Xbox One S with more features for cheaper than the all digital edition. And
Exactly.
second, it was launching into an already saturated market. Most people who wanted an Xbox already had one. So I'm not really sure who they were trying to sell it to. Versus here, this is going to be there at the console's launch. And especially if they launch it at a cheaper price, you're not dealing with a saturated market. And good luck even finding extra PlayStation 5s around at launch. So what concerns me most about this is I think it might actually sell pretty well, and you and I are both physical collectors. And the second these things start to catch on, those companies are going to be ready to kick those disk drives out the door.
You bring up a very interesting the saturated market example because a consequence of that is that let's say you do shop around and you get the Xbox One S with a disk drive, that means that you have the option of paying a lot less for the games themselves. An example I always used was Like I bought Doom on eBay for Xbox One at like a ridiculously low price, like $7 for the
Yeah.
physical copy. But then when you looked at the same game on the Microsoft Store for digital download, it was still at $30 when it wasn't on sale. So yeah,
Yeah.
bringing that into a saturated market basically doomed the console from the start. But now that we
Doomed it.
have,
I see what you did there.
you got me. But now that we see this, where yeah, the consoles, it looks like both are going to be available straight at launch. It's going to be interesting to see the dynamic between physical and digital sales as they both start off from the same point.
Yeah, and it's especially concerning. What you pointed out is especially concerning because the second those physical sales start to really dwindle and become less and less of an option, or even if the market's, say, 30% of people with all digital and 70% with physical, there's still fewer of those physical copies out in the wild, which means those price drops on them probably aren't going to happen as much. And there's still a lot of situations like what you just described where you can get the physical copies cheaper, whether it's through eBay, GameStop, Amazon, or just retailers having sales. And honestly, reducing the number of choices you have to buy things as a consumer typically just means the price for us goes up. If those
Mhm.
discs start to like fade out or just become less available to people, then it just means the PlayStation Store has more and more of a monopoly on the space. So they can kind of do what they see fit with the price. It's okay, you want to play a game on our console, you got to buy it through our store at our price,
Mhm.
which
Yes, it
is
will. It will definitely be interesting to see how this plays out because the long and short of it is, we don't know how well this digital edition is going to sell at launch. I mean, definitely there are going to be people who are attracted to it because of the lower price point, but then there are going to be, I guess, quote unquote, enthusiasts or people who are more into gaming who have seen the Xbox all digital edition fail miserably and will avoid it like the plague. And it will be, I just can't stop saying it. It'll be so interesting to see how this market is going to evolve with the same platform, one on digital and one with the physical option.
yeah, I completely agree with you. And the kind of the last point I wanted to bring up on that one is the fact that we still deal with a lot of places that don't have good internet download speeds. So
That's true.
I'm concerned for those people as well, because as these digital things start to take off, then I think those physical copies are going to be harder and harder to get a hold of. The other point I wanted to raise here is we're assuming the digital edition is going to be cheaper, but we also know the hard drive size for the PlayStation 5 is supposed to only be 825 gigabytes. So I'm wondering if maybe they do the digital edition at the same price, but with a larger hard drive. I mean, we've seen a lot of the games this generation. They're like 50 gigs or more. A terabyte doesn't get you very far.
Hmm.
So that would be another option, I guess, that could tempt people. I mean, either way, I know you and I will always lean for the physical media. It's better to have a
Hmm.
disc, but it's a scary future we're looking at if this takes off. Because I was hoping we at least had two more generations with physical media, but this, the fact that it's so tacked on, it almost strikes me like Sony made the digital edition first and then went, you know, we probably still need a disc drive and kind of just added it on as an afterthought.
That is true.
So
Again, perhaps they saw the demise of the Xbox One all digital edition as they were developing PS5 and were like, oh no, we
it,
better put this disc drive on it or else.
yeah, it doesn't work. So we talked a lot about the differentiation between the two consoles. I mean, let's talk a little bit about like the console and the controller because this is probably, I would argue, the most dramatic console design we've seen probably since like the Sega Fuster Cluck back in the day.
Uh, I don't know if I would go that far, but it is definitely striking.
Yeah,
I
because
mean, because you have to think about like when the Wii came out, that was literally called Revolution, and it had this, breathing LED disc drive on the front of it.
that's
That
true.
was pretty jarring to some people, and same with even the first concepts of and the first models of the PlayStation 3. That strange, almost
The
oblong
George
shape
Foreman
that it
grill.
had to it. The what?
The George Foreman grill.
Yeah, the George Foreman grill. So, I mean, I am proud to say that this is just another This is another traditional Sony going a little bit over the top of the design, getting a lot of eyes on it, which you do love to see.
Yeah, because PlayStation 4, I mean, that was let's take some
Disappointing.
pancakes and stack them on each other.
Yeah, I was never a big fan of the PS4 design.
Neither
Sorry to
was
say.
I. I mean, as someone who went primarily PlayStation this generation and got an Xbox One X fairly recently at a good price, both of them
Mm,
are generic designs, but the One X
yep.
is much sleeker. So if you're going to be generic, I prefer the sleeker one.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, all right. So we talked a lot about the hardware. You ready to dive into some games?
Ooh, yes, I am.
All right. So I guess we can start off by talking about the game that intrigued us the most out of the ones that were revealed today. I mean, if you want to go ahead and get us started with that.
Ah, yeah. I really was yeah, there were just so many. I'm trying to process through them right now. I think the one that most struck me though was Returnal. That weird like quantum time loop thing with the plot and the
Yeah.
visuals were amazing.
Mm-hmm. That one looks
Like,
really intriguing.
yeah, just absolutely magnetic to someone like me.
Yeah, I was getting like the whole vibe of it felt very like sci-fi Mass Effect-y, but then you die and come back and then the world's changing every time.
Yeah, so it brings almost like if you know you want to just talk about it in terms of like games you put into a blender, like you can throw like some Soma in there, a little bit of Observer,
Yeah.
and like you said, Mass Effect.
Yeah, and it's got like it almost strikes me as having a couple of roguelike elements too from indie games, and we know Housemarque made a lot of indie stuff for Sony in the past, so
Hmm.
that's gonna be a cool one to see.
Oh, definitely.
And like you were saying, the visuals in it are absolutely striking, and since it's coming out of Housemarque, I mean, I'm assuming that's a PlayStation exclusive, which would be,
Hmm.
I mean, that's just another thing to help sell the system for them.
Yeah, we hope so at this point.
Yeah, I mean, and then if we're talking about other games that were really kind of shocking at this one, the next Spider-Man game was revealed when the first one only came out less than 2 years ago, which is kind of crazy. So, I mean, Insomniac's a big studio. They have like multiple teams working on multiple projects, but that's crazy quick turnaround in
Yeah,
today's day and age. The,
you just can't stop them.
yeah, I think the main thing I wanted to point out about this one in particular is the game didn't look, as someone who spent a lot of time with Spider-Man on the PS4, the game didn't look dramatically different from the PS4 version. So part of me is almost wondering if this is like Spider-Man 1.5, if that makes sense, more than a Spider-Man 2. So almost like Xenoblade 2 on the Switch got Xenoblade the Torn of the Golden Country, which was like a side story that was sizable. It was like 50% of a full game. There's a couple other examples of it, or like the additional content that Atlas likes to add to their games to make them like this extra side chapter that goes longer, that type of stuff. I'm kind of questioning if this is a full game or not.
I think my favorite is Grand Theft Auto 5
Oh yeah.
expanded and enhanced.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's the
It's getting
title.
it's getting the Skyrim treatment of this is going everywhere.
Yeah, you're just gonna have to keep rebuying it.
Of course, unless you bought it on PC, but then you don't own a disc, so forget that.
Oof.
But still, yeah, I mean I didn't expect anything different from Rockstar, to be honest.
Hmm.
They already did it once. I think they're just going to keep milking that game until it doesn't sell anymore. GTA on the PS4 continues to be in like the top 10 of sales
Oh
charts
yeah.
almost every week. So, as long as it keeps selling, I don't think they see any reason not to do it. I'm curious what the enhanced content will be. You know, will they add more story
Yeah.
chapters, or is it just going to be better visuals? Or
The visuals looked the same in the trailer, but they might have just been pulling old visuals.
yeah, honestly, it's hard to say. Well, I like ports when they're done well. My concern with this one is they're making so much money off of it. I'm not sure it's going to be done well. Might
Yeah,
just
they
be
they're probably just trying to shove it onto the new console so that
exactly.
yeah.
And what's weird about that to me is both Microsoft and Sony at this point have confirmed basically all of your current generation games should work on next gen. So I'm wondering if they're going to end up shutting down the servers for GTA 5 on the current gen systems to force you to buy it for next gen. Because otherwise, if I'm a player of that game, I'm going to ask, well, it works on my current system. What reason do I have to buy it again for the current system if my old copy still works?
I think the PS3 servers are still up and running.
They probably are. They are for a lot of games. I mean,
because yeah, I remember the big pull. Because I don't know if you know a lot about GTA 5, but there is a huge difference between like the PS3 version and the PS4 version. Like
right.
The PS4
right.
version has so much more content, like just right off the bat. They keep getting updates. They keep getting more online enhancements. They keep getting new story chapters added.
They added a gambling
I think it's just
mechanic.
The whole. I think that was always there a little bit, but like I think the whole pull of it is like just like if you want to stay current with this game, you're going to have to upgrade. It's not a matter of like, oh well, it works on this. It's like, oh yeah, it works on that, but you're
not
still
the good
missing
version.
a ton. Yeah, it's not the good version, but
yeah,
because you're just missing a ton of content once you go from one generation to the next.
Yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. Yeah, that's one of the more interesting ones there. I think another one that I think a big thing to note about this is the number of exclusives that we saw. So you mentioned Returnal, which is that's coming straight out of SIE Worldwide Studios, so Sony's group. I mentioned SpiderMan. Then on top of that, we've got Gran Turismo 7, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, Project Athia, which that's coming out of Square Enix, and the way they said it in the trailer was interesting because they said developed like built around the PlayStation 5, so I don't know if that means it's getting ports to other systems or not, but for now I'm going to assume it's an exclusive. Then we also had...
Yeah, it could always be that thing where it launches exclusively on PS5 and then it gets adopted later. So,
yeah.
I mean, right now we could basically count that as an exclusive because right now it is exclusive to the PS5.
Right, so there's 4 right off the bat. Then we also have Returnal, or no, we already mentioned Returnal, so there's 5 off the bat. Then we have Sackboy: A Big Adventure, which is, I guess, kind of the big return of Little Big Planet. Destruction All-Stars, Astro's Playroom, the Demon Souls remake, and the Horizon Zero Dawn sequel. So that's crazy. That's 9 exclusives already announced. And then there's, of course, Godfall, but we've known about that for forever, and it's coming to PC too, so I only half count it.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. So many of these are just very attractive. I mean, because when you take it from my perspective, someone who doesn't own a PS4 but will hopefully backwards compatibility, committing, I will be able to experience like all of it at once, which will be really amazing.
Yeah, and the thing I really like about Sony's exclusives consistently, that's great to see for these too, since there's probably going to be a supply shortage like most console launches, is their titles usually drop in price pretty quickly. Like a year to 2 years after launch, you can usually get them half price or less. So there's going to be people who win out by being able to get the console at launch and getting these games that come out when they come out. But if you aren't able to get a console at launch and you get it like 6 months down the line, you can probably get a lot of these games at reduced prices. So it's like a win-win either way.
Yeah, I think my method right now is going to be just like get the console at launch and then just start playing PS4 games until the PS5 one drops in price.
Absolutely. Because, dude, a lot of the heavy hitters right now that I know you haven't had a chance to play cut down to $10 regularly. God of War, Horizon, SpiderMan, Persona 5, if you're going after the standard edition, is down to like $10. It came out a couple months ago. The Royal came out a couple months ago, and I've already seen that as low as 40 sometimes. So by holiday, it'll probably be down to like 20.
You'll love to see it.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the, that was the other one I wanted to bring up, the Demon Souls remake.
Oh, yes.
The graphics on this looked ridiculous.
They definitely did. I was sitting there the whole time like, what is this? What is this? And yeah, then the Demon Souls name dropped, and I've never played the first Demon Souls or the previous entries in the Demon Souls. I'm not sure what the series is, but I know I've heard the name before. I did think that this was somewhat of a reboot. So why don't you go a little bit into that for me?
Yeah, so I don't have a ton of experience with the Dark Souls franchise as a whole, but Demon Souls was the first game that kickstarted that franchise. So you had Demon Souls, which was exclusive to the PlayStation 3. Then the Dark Souls games came after that. So it was kind of From Software's start into that sort of brutally difficult melee-based combat RPG kind of game. But the original Demon Souls is stuck on the PlayStation 3 and did not run super well. And hasn't aged particularly great either. So, but I mean, as somebody who recently played through Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which takes a lot of the basic mechanics from like a Souls-like game, I've been starting to play through Neo on the PlayStation 4, which also takes a lot of inspiration from that. I'm excited to try this out. Just because, Bluepoint does great with their remasters. They did a lot of games this generation for Sony, including games like Shadow of the Colossus, the Uncharted trilogy, and a few others that, generally speaking, like you saw with the Demon Souls remake, they look great and they run great. And B, the gameplay looks really interesting, and so does the world. I mean, neither of us have experienced the game before, but it looks like a more... what's the word I'm looking for? A more gothic Elder Scrolls in terms of the world.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and I've heard nothing but good things about the combat. So I'm sure that's great too. So yeah, that's going to be a fun one to watch unroll. I'm curious what your perspective on Horizon was, since you don't have a lot of experience with that franchise.
Horizon has been a game series that I have been wanting to try for a very long time. I've seen people play it. I'm just gonna do the typical thing I do, where it's like putting games in a blender. It looks like, I guess, Breath of the Wild a little bit, mixed with like, I don't even know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's kind of hard to classify, but this game kind of blew me away in terms of A, how it looks, and B, just the scale of things with the number of different environments we saw. I mean, we saw everything from like swimming in these vast underwater environments to large open luscious areas of greenery to mountainscapes to everything else. It looks like it's an insanely large open world.
You do love games like that.
Yeah, I mean, because you don't run out of things to do with them. And I mean, I haven't played a ton of the first one just because backlog, but I can tell you the first one, especially from a visual perspective, is mind-boggling. That's a game that, yes, it uses the checkerboard rendering of the PlayStation 4 Pro, but it's one of those games where it's nearly indistinguishable from a native 4K. Like, the only way you're going to notice it is to pause in motion at just the right time and take a screenshot, and you might see a couple of pixel artifacts here and there. So, to give this same team a console that's over double the power of the Pro and just see what they're able to do, it's incredible. And what's even crazier is what they were showing in the game was gameplay. Like, that's not
really
a cutscene. No.
Because I didn't watch it before. I'm watching it right now, and yeah, that's pretty incredible. To look at, like, from the fur to the little sea critters moving around, just like everything is so alive.
Yeah, that's what's really striking about the world of that game, is it feels so vibrant. It feels like you're kind of walking through this place that is a living environment around you, which I think is what a lot of open world games go for, but not many succeed in all that well.
Yeah.
So that's
definitely
what's especially interesting about this one, is that was rumored to be Sony's big launch title for the PlayStation 5, and it turned out to be SpiderMan. But they also haven't announced a launch date, so I'm wondering if they're kind of saving that as another big hype factor for a couple months down the line when we're closer to launch to kind of rekindle the interest.
Do we have a launch date for the system itself?
We just know holiday 2020 for this and Series X. Yeah, they've just said holiday 2020. I mean, traditionally it's always November.
Soon they'll start the dick measuring contest of ours is going to launch a week sooner.
Yeah. Ours is $50 cheaper. Mine has Game Pass. Like, we'll see what happens. But you're right. That's exactly what's going to get started. It's just a matter of time.
I do kind of like the dynamic that we discussed a little bit earlier about the Series X and the PS5. Series X is kind of just like this old man coming like,
Hey, Shaddy, we have all your old games in like
Yeah,
60 FPS now. Do you remember 2001? I do. That's why we have memory cards again.
that is so right. Because their SSD solution, you just pop it in the back of the console like a memory card. But the backwards compatibility stuff, I applaud Microsoft on that.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, it's not true backwards compatibility. It's downloading an additional file, but it looks great. I mean, after I picked up my Xbox One X, I popped in Final Fantasy 13. Say what you want about that game. It's in terms of its gameplay, but visually it looks stunning. On the One X, it's upscaled to nearly 4K with the patch. It's like instead of 2160p, I want to say it's like 2056p. So it's close enough. That game looks ridiculous. And the fact that they've been working with their backwards compatibility team to make it so the hardware in the Series X can handle increased frame rates, adding HDR and all that stuff to games without the developer needing to do anything, means that we may actually see a case in the Series X where if a game's backwards compatible, it doesn't matter which game it is. You just pop it in, it looks nicer, it plays better, and everything else. That's awesome. Versus Sony, I mean, we can play our PS4 games, I guess.
Yeah, my favorite thing about the Microsoft solution though is that it, like, even though, like you mentioned, it's true, it's not pure backwards compatibility, but it functions in exactly the same way. Like
Yeah,
how when I put, for example, my Oblivion disc into my Series X, it basically just goes and downloads the game. But after that point, it's as if I just put in the disc and I'm able to play the game like I could do on the Xbox 360 with that game, for example. And not only can I do that on the Series X like that, like you mentioned, they just add so much stuff on top of it in terms of performance and visuals. It's absolutely amazing. It's almost like backwards compatibility plus.
exactly. And that's one of the big things. I guess now we can talk about a couple things I felt like this presentation was missing was
Mhm.
Sony didn't say anything about backwards compatibility. So what we had heard from Mark Cerny at that Road to PlayStation 5 event was, I believe, a slip of his tongue where he said, yeah, so we have about the 100 or so most popular PlayStation 4 games up on running on PlayStation 5, which sounds absolutely dreadful in terms of backwards compatibility. What they put out in a press release a couple days later was what they really meant was the vast majority of PlayStation 4 games should be playable. And I think it was more so like about 100 or so they know to be enhanced correctly based on the hardware. But like you said, that's nothing compared to Microsoft's catalog. There have literally been games I owned on PS3 I've bought cheap again on Xbox 360 because they're backwards compatible for the One X.
I've actually done that too with Oblivion. I was a fan of it on the PS3, and then I knew it was going to run better on the Xbox One Series X. So now or not. Wait, what? Yeah, Xbox One X.
Just
God,
throw
these
some
names are really
X's around
confusing.
and it's probably a
Yeah,
Microsoft console. It's fine.
I'll find it eventually. But
Yeah.
yeah, you know what I mean. I got it for that, and now I'm in the process of converting my save files over, and hopefully I'll be able to experience that game in the lush environment that Microsoft has so graciously provided me for it.
Yeah, and what's so awesome about that and so disappointing about what Sony does is Microsoft's basically doing that just out of generosity. They don't make any direct money off of that.
Hmm.
I mean, indirectly, it may help them sell a few systems, but on the whole, it's basically just a nice perk to users of the platform because they don't resell you those games. If you're picking up those games physically now, you're getting them secondhand. The vast majority, at least, there are a handful they still resell, like the original Red Dead Redemption, but still, it's
Yeah,
crazy awesome.
it's almost ironic though, because you see Sony being like, yes, we're the legacy system. You know, we have this big legacy behind us, and then they go on and say that they bring you backwards compatibility when all they mean is that you can just buy the game again from their store.
Yeah, and even that past the PS4, it's a very select number of titles. Like they have maybe 20 or a little over 20 PlayStation 2 games there. So
Wow.
it's not good selection. Like you said, they like to talk about their legacy and everything else, but they don't seem to care much about it.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Microsoft doesn't say much about it, and then here they are giving us this wonderful backwards compatibility plus.
Yeah. I mean, and while we're talking about Microsoft a little bit, and you brought up the memory cards and everything else, one thing that surprised me that we didn't see here was a direct talk about the SSD and what kind of a difference it makes, because the PlayStation 5 has much faster transfer speeds, but Series X is a much more powerful console on paper. Microsoft is going to be shouting from the top of a podium from now until launch day about how world's most powerful console, like they have been with the Xbox One X, but Sony doesn't seem to be making a huge deal about that SSD speed. So that just struck me as kind of odd.
It is interesting because, I mean, they definitely have spoken about it in the past, but considering that this is essentially a console reveal trailer, or a platform reveal trailer, really, yeah, you would think they would bring more emphasis to that because they should know at least that they are going to be fighting Microsoft on that front, basically because that's the only front Microsoft has left at this point.
Yeah, and it's not going to be like last generation, I don't think, where Sony launches a cheaper system that's more powerful. That was kind of a one-time deal, I think.
Yeah, that entire generation, like when all the consoles first launched, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think the PS4 only did so well that generation because it was the only platform that at launch didn't massively screw up as did the Xbox One and the Wii U.
Exactly. Those other two, I don't think you could have. In the case of the Xbox One especially, I don't think you could have planned a worse launch. I don't think you could have intentionally made it worse. And the Wii U wasn't a whole lot better, especially with the games. You got that launch lineup, and then you got crickets kind of from there on.
Exactly, man. It was not a fun time.
Some rough days, yeah. I will say this though. The Ratchet and Clank trailer, I'm not sure if you watched that one, showed dimensional hopping within the game, so they would instantaneously transition from one vast open area to another, which almost in the same sense as if fast travel was actually fast in games. So I guess that was their way of possibly trying to show the speed of the SSD without directly stating it.
You know, kind of a brain spark you just gave me is that it was briefly mentioned in the trailer, kind of like what I've been saying, where it's like hardware limitations are essentially a thing of the past when it comes to game mechanics.
Right.
Like the only time that hardware is really challenged nowadays is when they just try and shove a bunch of graphics into it.
Yeah.
But you have to remember that way back in the day, you would have to sacrifice whole game mechanics just to get a product up and running.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of like what you mentioned, because the Ratchet and Clank, as you're right, I did watch a little bit of it, and yes, there was dimensional hopping. So that, in a weird way, almost breeds a new game mechanic in the sense that you could instantly, I mean, sure, other games had a mechanic like that, but it's just so instant and so much at once that it almost breeds a new game mechanic entirely.
Yeah.
Just from having the SSD in the way it is. And that sort of thing, that evolution and that sort of being able to actually add more game mechanics for the first time I've seen in a while is very groundbreaking.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point with that. And we actually talked a little bit about it when we were talking about Returnal, I think, when all those environments were shifting so much around you every time you, I guess, respawned, for lack of a better word. That's probably thanks to that SSD speed being able to get all that data to the system so quickly. And I didn't even think about the whole idea of new game mechanics, but yeah, I mean, we're used to, if I'm using fast travel in Skyrim, we're used to at least a 10 to 15 second load screen between when I select it and when I don't. Versus this, when it's instantaneous, you can actually make it so you can be teleporting during combat and everything else. And I'm wondering if that was meant to be Sony's point here. Was in a couple of those games, when you stop and think about it, you're like, I don't think my Xbox One X can do that. I don't think my PlayStation 4 Pro could do that, because it would be trying to get stuff off this old mechanical hard drive.
Yeah, that's something interesting too. And you wonder how many of these games would even be possible to translate over to the Series X at this point, just because the SSD hardware is so baked into even the programming on PS5. So that's definitely something to consider.
For sure. I think another game I wanted to touch on briefly before I talk about a couple of the things that I think they kind of missed the mark with, or that we were expecting to see here that we didn't. You had mentioned Ghostwire Tokyo. This we know is a third-party game, or I'm pretty sure we know it's a third-party game going everywhere. But this game looked incredible.
Oh yes, definitely. One of those ones that was, again, simply magnetic. Like, I love games that do the horror genre very well, and even from the trailer, I can tell that there was a lot put into this game.
Yeah, to me, it struck me more as a thriller than horror, like thriller action kind of thing. So you might be right that it's more of a horror thing. I think it's kind of hard to tell from the trailer because they focus so much on the gameplay. I think
That's true.
The atmosphere a lot of times is what distinguishes the thriller from horror, which is hard to kind of distinguish until you actually play it. But it looked really intriguing. I mean, it was like first-person shooter with some superpowers, but then they had like a scene where you were on the bike grappling someone. So
I know. I was thinking, like, did you just like take a ghost out of midair?
yeah, it's really neat. I'm going to be curious to see how that game actually plays when it comes out. It looks like it's going to be a fun time. My only concern is it's Bethesda, and well, they gave us Fallout 76. Yeah. But in terms of go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to point out that one of the things I wanted to talk about when we were talking about the SSD mechanics, and this is just sort of like how far we've come. Like, I remember when I would play Skyrim on the PS3, and I would dread having to open doors because I knew there'd be a really long load screen in between when I would open the door and when I'd actually get in the building.
Yeah. And I mean, even building off of that a little bit, from what I've heard from speculation online, the SSD speeds are so fast in the PlayStation 5 that I think you'll remember as well as I do, on a lot of the old cartridge-based systems like the N64, the Super Nintendo, the Genesis, developers could actually like bake stuff into the cartridge to help compensate for things the console itself didn't have. And we saw that with, like, I think Star Fox was an example on the Super Nintendo, where there was extra hardware basically within the cartridge that could be exploited. The way the SSD supposedly works in the PlayStation 5, developers could theoretically pull stuff like that off again because it is so quick. They could have, like, it's almost like extra RAM for the system.
That is true. It would be very intriguing for me, as you know, I study computer science. I would love to actually get more into how they utilize the SSD to its full extent in programming.
Then I highly recommend you watch Mark Cerny's talk. He didn't fully go into that, but he explained how they developed the I/O and everything to basically communicate between the SSD and the system itself to get everything working in terms of that speed stuff.
Oh, I'll keep my eye on that.
Man. Okay, so in terms of some other things that we were supposed or rumored to probably hear about here that we didn't really get to see, Silent Hill has been rumored for a long time to be being brought back in some way, shape, or form by Sony, and that they licensed the IP out from Konami for a PlayStation 5 exclusive. That would have just sent this presentation over the top. You mentioned the horror thing, and I feel like the horror genre as a whole has been missing some heavy hitters outside of games like Resident Evil in recent times. So bringing something like Silent Hill back that's a well-known IP, I think would have been groundbreaking.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that there has been sort of a vacancy in that area in horror games. Most of the horror games that I've played recently, or at least, you know, the newer ones, the more recent ones, have been on the PC or have been like really third parties with not a lot of backing, but they're on the PC. A lot of times they're on the Xbox One as well. And, you know, they don't have the software developers behind them that can really hit hard with this kind of stuff. So having another entry in the Silent Hill series would really bring that back.
Yeah, and I mean, like you were saying, the genre still exists, but it's a lot of indie developers. And indie games are great, but they don't have the budget to give it the same production value.
Exactly.
And when we look at the way Sony traditionally handles their first-party titles, if they're licensing out this IP, and that turns out to be true, and we see it at like a later PlayStation 5 event, we know that game's going to be getting the full works. I mean, most of Sony's first-party games are multi-million or if not billion-dollar projects to get totally up and running, or billions in a bit of an exaggeration, but they've got all kinds of motion capture, incredible like film quality, music scores, and everything else on top of the development costs. So if that indeed is coming back, I think it's going to fill that vacancy, and I think it's going to sell a lot of units to people because I know you're a fan of that franchise to some extent. That thing's been dead for nearly 10 years, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I think it has a lot of traction at this point, because if you remember all the publicity that the Silent Hill project for PS4 got that didn't come out, and then the whole PT thing, I think now there's a lot of fans out there who are really salivating for that right now, and I think if they capitalize on that, that would be a massive boon to them.
Yeah, it's gonna be crazy. The next game that there are a lot of rumors about in terms of possibly having been shown at this event but wasn't, was Bloodborne, the other Dark Souls-esque game that's currently a PlayStation 4 exclusive. There's been kind of rumors circulating about Sony either having like a PlayStation 5 enhancement or possibly bringing it to PC. What I find interesting about both this and the Silent Hill rumor is that both of them, while they're very big titles and I think would generate a lot of traction, also have games in a very similar kind of batting cage that were present here. So in the case of Silent Hill, it wasn't here, but the new Resident Evil game was shown here. In the case of Bloodborne wasn't here, but the Demon Souls remake was. So I'm wondering if those rumors are still true, because they were reported by multiple outlets, but it's just coming later, and Sony didn't want to like compete with themselves, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do, but I think it's more along the lines of, I mean, it's sort of like we said earlier. When Sony puts polish on these things, they turn out to be great. Perhaps they're just holding them back a little bit until they can push them a little bit further.
That's also true.
But still have those like slots, like you mentioned, filled.
That's also true, and I think that gamers as a whole in recent times have become more and more frustrated when developers show a project that's still years away. I mean, people, like, it seems like every Nintendo Direct, for example, people are like, where's Metroid Prime 4? Where's Metroid Prime 4? Because it got announced when alongside the Switch, basically, or within a year of the Switch's launch. But we haven't seen much of it since then because they had to restart development, or the same thing for like Bayonetta 3. So I guess maybe Sony's trying to avoid that because they know, maybe these, like you said, these projects are in development, but they want them to turn out really good. So they're trying not to reveal them way ahead of time and drive people nuts.
Yeah, that could definitely be.
And then the last thing I wanted to touch on, I was kind of surprised we didn't see here, was anything about the user interface. So there was a brief little thing right before the trailer for Astro's Playroom that looked kind of like a user interface, but Sony's also done a couple of titles this generation, like the game Tearaway, where part of the game experience is making it seem like the game is within a toy room. And what I mean by that is, like, in the case of this, since it's an Astrobot game, it's possible that was like a fake user interface. It was a user interface that was part of the game, if that makes sense, that looked like the PlayStation. Or in the case of like Tearaway this generation, there's a part where it makes the game show like you're watching TV, but you really aren't. So I'm wondering if that's what they were doing there. I thought this would have been something cool to see, because it's something you interact with a lot on the system. It's not a huge deal, but having a snappy user interface that you can navigate easily does make a difference.
Yeah, I'm just watching that little clip you mentioned right now with it basically, it's like a menu that pops up and says press the PS button on your controller, and yeah, it looks beautiful. It looks but I think this is just a part of starting the game, because it looks like right after this they show gameplay.
Unless that was meant to show us how quickly you can get in games, because I know a big thing Sony's been talking about all the way since the launch of the PlayStation 4 was everything being immediate. That's the only thing I can think of, is maybe that was their point, was, oh, this is the UI. We're not going to directly state it, but this is how quick you get in the game. You press the PlayStation button, it's launched, you're in, you're right back to where you were.
I mean, yeah, I definitely don't think that they would have added this press PS button just for show in like a trailer. So I mean, it does have to be some form of UI, whether it be in the game that they were talking about or the PS4 native or PS5 natively.
Yeah, that'll be neat to see. I mean, I'm not one who usually makes a big deal about the UI. I know some people are. The one time I can think of that I was irritated with the UI was when I first got my Xbox One S. The older versions of the Xbox One UI felt pretty terrible. Like, it just took forever.
Even the current ones, trust me.
Yeah, I mean, having played the One X, the current ones I don't think are quite as bad, but they still feel very clunky. Like, a lot of times it takes me a bit just to find like the settings menu I'm looking for or whatever, because it doesn't feel like anything's where it should be, and it doesn't feel like anything's easily accessible. It feels like I have to go through 3 or 4 menus just to get where I want to be.
Or it's just sitting there or stuttering or oftentimes just glitching out. Like,
yeah.
It's insane that they... Again, Microsoft does this thing. It's the most powerful console. Well, why doesn't the main menu work right?
Yeah, that's the...
You're telling me the world's most powerful console is having trouble generating a menu?
It can't render those 4K pixels of your dashboard.
It's that background you picked, man. It's just way too intense.
Yeah, and traditionally, I think Sony puts a lot of thought into this. I know you haven't played on PS4, but the PS4 user interface is pretty similar to the PS3's, which I overall thought was pretty good.
Yeah.
And like,
I forget what they called it. It had a name. It was like X something. I feel bad I can't think of it right now.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I can't think of it either. My biggest complaint with the PlayStation 4 one was, unlike the PS3, it didn't have all of your games like listed in a column. Your games were instead in a row. So if you had a lot of titles on there, sometimes that could kind of overflow, sort of like the Switch a little much. But other than that, it always felt snappy. So I'm hoping they kind of just tweaked it and made it a little bit better rather than messing with it dramatically.
Yeah, I'm honestly not too sure what to expect from that, because like you mentioned, they improved it somewhat incrementally going from the PlayStation 3 to the PlayStation 4. So it is going to be interesting to see that jump there. I'm trying to think of what else they could do, but like you said, I don't have much experience with the PS4 menu as of yet. I can only really comment or compare it to the PlayStation 3 menu, which is probably irrelevant at this point.
Yeah, but like I said, the basic gist of the two is very, very similar. I mean, the only thing I can think of is maybe a better folder system. So like, if I wanted to make a category for games and be like, this is my folder with all my RPGs or something like that. That's the only other thing I can think of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
comment more on that.
Anything else you wanted to bring up about the game trailers or anything like that?
Other than that, I'm really excited now.
Okay, I think I've got one last game I want to touch on, just because I'm not typically one for indie games, but this one really struck me. It was
Go for it.
Kena Bridge of Spirits. And Ember Lab, I've never heard of them. They're the developer behind this. The game, we've been doing the put games in a blender thing. The art style reminded me a lot of the game Concrete Genie on the PlayStation 4, or if I were to try and describe Concrete Genie without using itself, it would be kind of like a Pixar movie to some extent. The overall styling actually reminds me a fair bit of Moana for some reason. But the game looks beautiful, and it seems to have some interesting combat mechanics. Like, it showed the main protagonist using a bow, and then when she shot it, it was this sort of blue piercing energy that would then split against multiple enemies. It just seemed really unique and interesting to me. So, and I think that was my last point, was Sony had a lot of indie games at this presentation, which is interesting, because the start of the PlayStation 4, they really emphasized indie games. They were kind of backing people with them and everything else. And then as the PlayStation 4 generation went on and they had all their major AAA first-party titles come out, it seemed like that emphasis sort of disappeared. And here we kind of see it back. I mean, almost half this list are indie games.
Yeah, it really shows that at least Sony is committing to the indie developers in this case, because like you said, that was their big thing come the launch of the PlayStation 4, was we're almost going to make this market within our own market that can support indie developers very nicely. And yeah, seeing as half their lineup right now is indie games, that does show that commitment very well.
Yeah, and they, even the few we talked about, seem like they're probably pretty good games too. It's not like they're just oh, this is that cell phone game that we're going to port to the PlayStation 5. They seem like they've actually got some heart and effort put into them. So that's going to be fun to see. I'm looking forward to hopefully being able to secure a PlayStation 5 at launch and try some of these out.
All they have to do is confirm backwards compatibility, and I am in.
Now, when you say that, do you mean backwards compatibility for PS4 or generations before that?
You know what I mean. I want to be able to put the disc in and play the game.
Yeah. We'll keep dreaming. We'll keep dreaming. I can't wait for the day I can pop my Persona 3 disc into my PS5 and it'll just play. But anyway,
honestly, same.
Anyway, I think that's going to wrap our thoughts up on this video, guys. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. If not, constructive criticism is always welcome, and we'll catch you guys next time.
See you later.